Let's dive into one of history's biggest what-ifs, Napoleon Bonaparte. I mean, the name itself is legendary. He came so close to conquering all of Europe. But what if he'd actually pulled it off? What if the Battle of Waterloo had gone the other way?
Just try to picture it for a second. A world completely redrawn. A map that you and I, but we wouldn't even recognize it.
You know Germany, right? Well, in this world, forget it. The long, complicated process of all those little German states coming together to form one nation, yeah, that never happens. They'd just be scattered pieces of a much bigger French-led puzzle.
And Spain? That powerful, fierce national identity that they forged during that absolutely brutal Peninsular War? It would have just been extinguished. Its people absorbed into a totally new French-dominated reality.
Instead of all these countries, you would have just one, a single, colossal French empire stretching from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Russian border, with everything run out of Paris. And we're not just talking about a political change here. This is a fundamental reshaping of, well, all of Western civilization.
So, you've got to be wondering, how on earth could one man govern a territory that massive and diverse? Well, Napoleon's answer was simple and, honestly, pretty brutal. Scrap all the old ways and force a single, unified system on everyone. A new blueprint for a new Europe.
And at the very heart of this whole thing is the Napoleonic Code. Now, this wasn't just some dusty old law book. It was a revolutionary document. It swept away centuries of local customs, religious laws, and special privileges for the aristocracy, and replaced all of that with a single, rational, secular set of rules for every single person in the empire. It's so influential, you can still find its DNA in legal systems all over the world today.
This really shows you the social earthquake he kicked off. He just dismantled the Ancien Régime, the old rule, where your power was based on who your parents were. In its place, he built a new order where, at least in theory, you got ahead based on your talent and your service to the state, not your family name.
But let's be clear, this new order wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy. This quote from a French official in Italy, wow, it just drips with contempt. It gives you a peek into the mindset behind the whole imperial project. French administrators really saw themselves as bringing enlightenment to what they considered backward peoples. They weren't just exporting laws, they were imposing a superior culture on people they thought were too emotional, too unreliable, and basically just in desperate need of some good old French discipline.
Of course, laws only work if people actually believe in them, and Napoleon knew that. To forge a lasting empire, he first had to forge a new kind of imperial citizen. And what was his #1 tool for this massive undertaking? Education.
So he created this top-down, three-tiered system that was totally controlled by the central government. Local towns ran the primary schools, but the real focus, the real money, was on the secondary schools and universities. And all of it fell under the umbrella of a single entity, the Imperial University. Now, this wasn't a campus you could visit. It was a giant governing body that oversaw every single aspect of education across the entire empire.
The crown jewels of this system were the high schools, called lyceums. Their purpose couldn't have been clearer, to produce the next generation of loyal bureaucrats, army officers, and engineers. The curriculum was super practical, a little bit militaristic, and relentlessly focused on one thing, serving the state. It was basically an assembly line for the machinery of empire.
And they weren't even subtle about it. This quote from a director of a college in Italy is frankly chilling. He's openly saying that his goal is to break a child's ties to their home, their family, and their local values. The entire point was to erase those loyalties and replace them with an absolute devotion to the emperor and the French state.
Now, this push for total state control was bound to crash into something, and it crashed head-on into the one institution that commanded a loyalty even deeper than family, the Catholic Church.
Napoleon saw the church as a direct rival for the hearts and minds of his subjects, so the government launched a systematic campaign to just dismantle its power. Monastic orders that were often loyal to Rome dissolved. Religious festivals that were the backbone of community life banned. Church property seized. This was, for all intents and purposes, a war against God for control over society.
And this wasn't just some abstract policy. It had a very real, very human cost. You can just feel the anguish in this letter from a mother superior in Italy, watching as her entire world, her source of peace and meaning, was just being destroyed by the state.
And the strategy was so methodical. The regime went after every single pillar of the church's influence.
It targeted its wealth by closing monasteries, its authority by shutting down church courts, its place in daily life by banning festivals, its role with the youth by taking over education, and its social network by dissolving lay confraternities. It was a total assault. But the people didn't just take this lying down. The resistance was rarely violent, but it was incredibly creative and stubborn. When nuns were ordered to stop wearing their religious habits, many just designed new civilian clothes that, what a coincidence, looked exactly like their old habits. When a saint's day was banned, the whole town would just happen to take the day off and gather near the church anyway. It was this massive, quiet movement of civil disobedience.
Okay, so the empire has completely reshaped Europe from the inside, but the shockwaves of a change this big would be felt far, far beyond its borders. A unified Napoleonic Europe would have triggered a geopolitical earthquake across the entire globe.
All of a sudden, there's a new titan on the world stage. With all the industrial and demographic power of an entire continent harnessed under one government, this French empire could seriously challenge Britain's mastery of the seas, and it would fundamentally alter the balance of power, right as the United States was just starting to find its footing.
I mean, even in our own timeline, Napoleon's ambitions had a huge impact on America. He's the reason for the Louisiana Purchase. He sold all that land to fund his wars, and in doing so, he doubled the size of the U.S. His economic warfare with Britain strangled American trade, and all those conflicts at sea were a direct cause of the War of 1812. In a world where he wins, this whole dynamic would have been turned up to 11.
You can actually watch the growing alarm in the words of American leaders like Thomas Jefferson. He went from being a cautious skeptic in 1800 to calling Napoleon the Attila of the age by 1814. Jefferson, a guy who championed liberty, came to see Napoleon as its ultimate destroyer, a tyrant whose thirst for blood was simply unquenchable.
And the ripples would just keep spreading. I mean, think about language. With French being the language of administration, science, and high culture across all of Europe, and with that empire projecting its power all over the globe, it's very, very likely that the world's common language today wouldn't be English. It would be French.
So let's kind of sum this all up. A Napoleonic world would probably be more uniform in a lot of ways. You'd have a single legal code, a centralized government, a very secular public life. But, and this is a huge but, that unity comes at a really steep price: the suppression and possible extinction of local languages, traditions, and national identities.
And that leaves us with the central question of this entire alternate history, doesn't it? Napoleon offered this vision of a rational, ordered, unified continent. But was that order worth the sacrifice of all the vibrant, chaotic, and diverse cultures that it would have stamped out? Was the price of his empire the soul of Europe itself?